Well, welcome to session 2 of the 2024 Nova Conference. This session is on Beyond the Horizon, Imagining New Possibilities. I'm Susan Prescott, Director of the Nova Network and Professor of Planetary Health at the University of Western Australia, and it's my pleasure to be chairing the conference. Like all our sessions, this will be a series of short talks by panellists, followed by opportunities for discussion. We have 9 speakers and we plan to pause for discussion after the first 5 talks to capture any immediate questions, time permitting, and then we'll have another discussion at the end. And these discussions will be open to everyone. Conversation is one of the most powerful tools we have for change. By sharing knowledge, we gain new perspectives, new ideas, and new meaning. It's become increasingly clear that the magnitude of change required in our world today requires a spiritual and a cultural transformation. That means changing not only what we're doing, but how we are doing it. So to begin, I would like to invite Rick Scott to guide us through a mindful moment to bring us all into a connected heart-mind space for our time together. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Susan. For today's mindful moment and in the spirit of connection, I actually invite you to turn your cameras on for this next few moments so that we can see each other and see all of the lovely beings on this call. So let's just start by shaking the energy around a little. Just feel your body move, whatever's comfortable for you. You can be as silly as you want. Just feel that movement and feel that energy connection that we all share. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, let's all wave a heartfelt welcome to all of our colleagues, our friends, all of the spirits and the beautiful beings that are in those little boxes, but that are animated with life. Wonderful, and welcome to everyone. At Nova, one of our values, one of our core values is heart. And for the next few moments, I'm going to read a short poem that one of our colleagues and friends, Valentina Morani, wrote a few years ago. And as I'm doing that, I invite you to look at all of the different people, those that you know, those that you don't know, and just make that heartfelt connection with them. Okay? From my light to your light, from my heart to your heart, from awareness to oneness, for the greatest good of all. And in that spirit of connection, let's close with a group hug. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rick, for opening our sessions in this important way. And I think we personally should have more moments of heart and mind connection in everything we're doing. So I'm going to begin now with my 5-minute introduction to set the scene and to introduce our wonderful first speaker. So we'll run that right now. Thank you. This session invites us to look beyond the horizon and imagine new possibilities. We need transformative ideas that support sustainable prosperity and the evolution of human civilization while aligning human and environmental well-being and ensuring opportunities for individuals to fulfill their potential. To achieve this, we must let go of preconceived notions shaped by current worldviews while remaining grounded in our present realities. This includes recognizing resource limitations, addressing inefficiencies, and shifting the attitudes, values, and mindsets that constrain our potential. While advancing technology will enhance our capacities, it's paramount that we also develop more evolved social systems and worldviews centered on well-being and flourishing. This requires prioritizing a shift in human consciousness to create cultural change and wiser social contracts for a pro-social world. We will continue the themes of energy and flourishing. Earlier discussions emphasised that well-being depends on healthier forms of energy, from the food that nourishes us at the cellular level to the social connections that support our emotional well-being. Unhealthy relationships with virtually all aspects of our physical and social environment are undermining individual vitality and collective flourishing. Healing these relationships with one another and with nature is crucial to creating sustainable solutions that meet the needs of all people without exploitation. These efforts must be centred around connection and community. This session will explore the broader dimensions of society and sustainability of civilization, focusing on energy as the foundation of all human activity as we seek a feasible transition to a non-fossil fuel paradigm. We'll envision future societies structurally, socially and spiritually, where infrastructure and systems harmoniously integrate society, technology and the environment with a higher level of consciousness. Despite our obsession with endless growth, there is growing recognition that it is unsustainable at every level. We must fundamentally change how we live. Our next speaker, Simon Michaud, will provide sobering insights into why many current renewable strategies are neither sustainable nor feasible. However, we will also hear visionary solutions, including how new energy paradigms could enable decentralization and contraction of the industrial sector. This simplification and regional manufacturing could foster resource balancing and self-sustaining systems. However, this also requires reorienting other sectors towards well-being, including ecological approaches to food production, healthcare focused on vitality, and regenerative economies that prioritise well-being. We need kinder, more compassionate societies with justice systems focused on prevention and reform rather than retribution. Cross-sectoral transformation hinges on educational reform and cultural change. Holistic thinking, emotional intelligence, and mutualistic values are needed to overcome the obstacles created by vested interests, apathy, fear, and greed. Integrating scientific understanding with ancestral knowledge and Indigenous practices will deepen connections to nature and community. This begins with fostering compassionate worldviews in early childhood. Ultimately, we need more love, not just because it is essential to well-being, but because it is the most powerful, universal inspiration for change. The data support this. A survey of nearly 58,000 people across the G20 countries identified one core unifying message capable of mobilizing people for change, and that message was love. Love for our children, for others, for our world, and the desire to protect it for the next generations. This transcended culture, education, or political ideation. We shouldn't be surprised that love is a universal driving force, nor should we shy away from it. Centering our goals in love strengthens and deepens collaboration, making our actions more meaningful and effective. This is why we emphasize inner resources and universal principles for social change and recognize spirituality as integral to planetary health, not a side issue. In a world where vast resources fuel war and destruction, love and peace are arguably the most critical elements of planetary health. Meaningful sustainability cannot be achieved without peace, love, wisdom, respect, and forgiveness. By normalizing deeper values in global discussions, we aim to accelerate the shift in consciousness necessary for real change. Our material resources may be limited, but our inner resources are without limit. This is where the real energy, the limitless potential energy of humanity really lies. So we are really excited to hear from our wonderful speakers who will pick up the different threads of this discussion. Each will speak for 5 to 7 minutes, with the exception of our first speaker, who will speak for 15 minutes. And I encourage you to explore everyone's bios in the chat link to maximize their time. We will begin by envisioning a future with the practicalities in mind, and I am so thrilled to welcome Simon Michaud, a gifted technical problem solver with a background in mining, energy and industry. Simon is an amazing integrationist with creative cross-sectoral ideas. He's a fellow Australian, now working for the government of Finland, exploring sustainable energy solutions, and he's going to share some of his visionary ideas for the future and realistic pathways to get there. So welcome, Simon. Thank you.
So I'm going to show you tonight a lightning fast summary of 3 or 4 pieces of work where I'm meeting the challenges that we all see head on. The challenges that we met, understood, and I'm going to showcase a solution that I'm proposing. Right. This is a new blueprint for the Great Simplification. What we're trying to do is leave a world worth living in to our grandchildren. First things first. At the moment, we're a petroleum-driven society. Most of what is around us now is dependent on oil, from transport to manufacture to how we live, and the decisions we make are dictated by the energy source that is petroleum. What you're seeing on the screen here is oil production. The concept of peak oil is the point where oil brought to the market reaches a peak, a maximum, and it starts to decline after that. It doesn't mean we're running out of oil. It just means we can't bring it to the market fast enough to meet demand. Supply and demand separate. It was considered a crackpot theory, but now it's an observation. There is a localized peak in November 2018. This has been in place for some time now. And here we are a couple of years later. A few years later, we had the COVID pandemic, supply disruptions. That's that big drop that you see. Since then, it has recovered somewhat, but it's settled on a plateau below that peak. Now, in the background, remember this: 81% of all existing oil reserves being annually depleted at a rate between 5 and 15%. The longer that peak is in place, the harder it is to beat, because underneath that, our oil supply is deteriorating and we're not discovering new stuff. So we need the after oil plan now. So that brings us to the second plan, the green transition. The proposed plan going forward: solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, hydrogen fuel cells. The basic question is, will this work the way we plan? When I came to Europe, and I used to sit in the European Commission meetings, and I would listen to discussions about plans for the future, I heard a lot of arm waving, but there wasn't a lot of reality. There was no plan for a fundamental industrial reform for the nation state of for nation states within Europe to phase out fossil fuels. So will this work? What I'm really asking, this is the quiet part said out loud, is can we continue to resource this? So I did a study, and the study was to work out for the calendar year of 2018, what industrially happened. What did fossil fuels do for us? How many cars, how many trucks, how much industrial activity, what distance do they travel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if everything was then transferred to a non-fossil fuel system, what would that look like? So all internal combustion vehicles are now electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cells. All power generation is now solar panels and wind turbines and nuclear and geothermal, hydroelectricity, what have you. I then worked out the metal content for each unit and summed it all together. And now we've actually got a quantity of metal by metal to phase out fossil fuels. This is a complete systems replacement, which in theory we're going to do in the next 25 years. There were 4 scenarios that I looked at. And the big scenario is wind and solar are highly intermittent in supply, as in they are very, very variable and connected to the weather. Our power needs to be even as it comes out of the wall at the same voltage, same current, and same frequency to a resolution of a millionth of a second. If we don't get that, we get power spikes, and our delicate electronics like computers age very quickly and fall apart. So that buffer, how big does it have to be? Conventional thinking believes it's only 5 to 7 hours, which is the pink. And I've got 3 more calculations. I believe the true answer is somewhere around the 28-day mark based on data I've downloaded from the Department of Energy in America with regard to their largest renewable power grid over 2 years. And then there was another thing for 3 weeks. The hatched column is all the mineral reserves, the estimated mineral resources, and whatever resources we know of under the sea, all summed together, as in all the metal that we know of on planet Earth. So this is a log scale. This is the same information on a linear scale. If the true answer is between the red and the blue, Then we've got the column here between the reported mineral reserves, estimated resources, and what resources we know of under the sea, all summed together. What this shows very clearly is these differences are so large that the green transition as planned will not work, and we need to develop a new plan, whatever that might be. Now remember, this is just to replace the first generation of renewable units. Your electric vehicles, your wind turbines, your solar panels, what have you. They all wear out. Now, some units will wear out as soon as 5 to 7 years, but some could be strung out to, say, 20 years. Whatever it is, in 20 years' time, we do it all again and we have to source the same volume of metal, and that puts pressure on recycling, which has its own story. For those who are interested, this work has been put together in a peer-reviewed publication through the Geological Survey of Finland, who I work for. It's got full calculation, all numbers, and it's all public domain. And I'm happy to talk to people if they wish to hear more about it. Okay, so this won't work. So what might we do? Well, we want electricity generation, we want transport, and we want manufacture. We want reliable and consistent stable power generation in all weathers, in all geographical locations. We want, preferably in a concentrated form. For example, every industrial site has a large industrial unit that needs a lot of power, for example, a mine site. And we want a low material footprint. This is where the green transition fell down. A long working life for each unit. So instead of units lasting only, say, 10, 15 years, we would like them to last for 50 to 100 years. And once they do come offline, they're designed to be recycled. Oh yes, we want a minimal waste plume with a very low environmental impact. That's the laundry list. Now, that seemed insurmountable a few years ago. I believe I can deliver at least some of this, if not all of it. Here's how. The green transition probably won't work in its current form, but the purple transition might. What I call the purple transition, why purple, it's my wife's favorite color, is as follows. At the heart of everything is a reimagined commodity sector. What we call the circular economy has evolved into the resource balanced economy. This is proper resource stewardship where we get the most out of all resources. Wrapped around that is a series of technologies, most of which are 50, 60 years old. The first is liquid fuel fission, also known as thorium-fueled molten salt modular reactors. Short-range transport should be done by electric vehicles, but they're powered by alternative chemistries, not lithium-ion chemistries. Things like sodium or fluoride can be used to make batteries. Zinc air batteries, for example. Okay, all of those batteries, though, still will use copper and still will use graphite. And so there are limitations. Society has to simplify. It has to shrink in size. We need to replace coal in the manufacturing sector, where we have to deliver high-end heat and lots of it. I'm proposing iron powder as a fuel. Burn iron powder, we can deliver that heat. And what's interesting, and we don't have resource constraints for iron, what's interesting is that iron powder can be recycled by putting it into a hydrogen atmosphere. So the next technology is the pyrolysis of human sewage to produce syngas. Pyrolysis is heating without oxygen. What we're doing is we're turning that human sewage into syngas, which is half carbon monoxide, half hydrogen, all of which is useful in reprocessing that iron powder back into a usable form. So what this means is society becomes powered by two things, thorium and human sewage as a power source. The last technology is ammonia-fueled internal combustion technology for our long-range transport between cities. Now, there's a lot of engineering problems that need to be overcome here, most of which have been put together as I understand it. There is a challenge matrix to overcome, which ammonia is still a sensible thing to look at. More on that later. Right, so we have a number of black swans coming in, but some of them could actually help us if we look at them differently. So the purple transition goes something like this. You have a network of technologies where there's no magic bullet, but how these technologies are fit together in a system might be a useful starting point. The thorium molten salt reactor generates electricity, which will charge our electric vehicle fleet, which are all run on sodium and fluoride battery chemistries. The combustion of iron powder will facilitate the manufacturing chain, and it can also be a stepping stone, a small stepping stone in the production of hydrogen if we use the sulfur iodine cycle. This will power our hydrogen fuel cell fleet, which is all our heavy vehicles. and steel can be produced in a hydrogen atmosphere. The hydrogen can also be used to produce ammonia, which will then fuel our long-range transport. So this is the hydrogen economy reinvented from a different direction. The thorium systems can recycle the iron powder through the pyrolysis of human sewage. So what you have here is a network. The thorium system empowers the combustion of iron powder. The combustion of iron powder with the thorium empowers ammonia-fueled ICE. And they all connect together in a balanced system with a new paradigm around how to manage our resources at the very center. So then the question is, what does society look like if we were to actually do this? Okay, so this is Promethean Nexus. This is an evolution of the Venus Project. This is where we apply what I've just presented. The Venus Project was started in the 80s by Jacques Fresco and Roxanne Meadows. The mandate behind it was if we would design a human settlement, let's call it a city, and we use the best science had to offer, but optimize the whole city into the well-being of the people who live there, what would it look like? Okay, so genius. So I took that and I've merged it with my work. So the vision is as follows. It's an evolution of the Venus Project powered by an unorthodox, mature energy source operating to a new resource management paradigm with a more responsible relationship with the planetary environment and the start of a new paradigm in social contract and how we might live. We will develop and construct a technology innovation hub in an unconventional city with the purpose of developing a new energy, raw materials, and manufacture paradigm, operated with a more socially mature kind of society. We will develop agricultural methodology that merges food production with natural biosystems without using petrochemicals. The principles of permaculture and regenerative agriculture will be used to symbiotically merge food production and natural biosystems. So food production would work with the natural biosystems, not against them. So what we're looking at here is a new decentralized energy system and a new decentralized industrial system, a reimagined and restructured transportation network with the resource balanced economy, the circular economy, the steady state economy, and the degrowth paradigm. So that we're degrowing the industrial system now and we're simplifying it. We're going to run society on a smaller number of components that are simplified, that can be manufactured from resources sourced locally from different materials. It's a simplification of complexity and in size. We're going to collapse the just-in-time supply grid across 6 continents into a single city for some strategic elements or a region. We're also going to look at a change in what money is used for. We seek to develop a comprehensive plan for social reclamation in which human beings, technology, and nature will be able to coexist in a long-term, sustainable, dynamic equilibrium. This is what we're going to be looking at. We're operating on 3 fronts simultaneously. My work sits in the top right-hand corner, industrial systems, raw materials, and energy. There'll be another frontier of the interaction of the planetary environment, and the third frontier is the new society and social contract. When all 3 are in place, we can move into the center. This is an artist's impression of what it might look like. And so it's a spoken radial system. Here is a site that I like in South America. Let's say our city lands there. There's a network of industrial systems around it. That's the thorium molten salt reactor. We will take water from the sea to produce power. The steam left over from that is desalinated. We'll pump it up into the highlands, into a series of reservoirs, balance the minerals, and then irrigate that back down to the city for our drinking water and for our industrial needs to run the constellation of industrial sites. We only need about half the water. So the rest of it will be irrigated into the local environment to green the desert. And over time, that desert will become the equivalent of a shrubland. So this is what the industrial system constellation could look like. We've got the entire value chain where everything is pilot scale, that is small scale, but we've got lots of things put together in what I call industrial permaculture, where everything is actually stitched together and balanced where the outputs of one are inputted into the other. So that's the quick lightning fast summary. For those who are interested, we talk more. We will launch this project in January 1st next year, and anyone who wants to get involved can do so. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Simon. I think we're very much people who think in an integrated way here, and I think seeing this integrated approach to our future is really inspiring. And your efforts to wake people up to reality in order to make that change are important, but you also make it clear that we've got so much more potential that we're not using. And to move forward into that reality, we need this cross-sectoral collaboration and new social contracts. And that provides the perfect introduction to our next speaker, David Sloan Wilson. He's an acclaimed evolutionary biologist and president of Pro-Social World. He is focused on how we can build productive, equitable, and collaborative groups for a world that works for all. So David, it's really wonderful to have you with us again. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. And I waited until I listened to this morning's session in order to write out my comments. And I'm going to read them with apologies just to be efficient. So I want to take off on a point that Christina Bethel made this morning, which is how much of the knowledge that we have for improving the human conditions is new. She said that even the fact that continents drift wasn't fully accepted until the 1960s. And so we need to think of the last 50 years as not just 10% of the scientific revolution. Bodies of knowledge have emerged during that period that are foundational for how we think and therefore how we act. We need to think of ourselves as looking in historic times, I think, intellectually. One of these bodies of knowledge is complex system science, which required the advent of widespread computing ability. So for the first time, we have scientific tools for studying the kind of interdependence that manifestly exists in the world, and that spiritual traditions have appreciated for millennia, but which previously could only be described in words. Another is the expansion of evolutionary theory beyond the study of genetic evolution to include such things as human cultural evolution, the individual person as an open-ended evolutionary unit, and artificial intelligence, which could equally be called artificial evolution. This is called generalized Darwinism, and it provides a new scientific toolkit for evolving the kind of world that we're envisioning in this conference. In particular, generalized Darwinism tells us that everything we call pro-social, oriented towards the welfare of others or society as a whole, can evolve by a Darwinian process, but only when special conditions are met. When these conditions are not provided, then the first two noble truths of Buddhism pertain. Life consists of suffering caused by agents that evolve to satisfy their cravings at cross purposes with each other. This is true for both nature and the human condition. Against this background, I must take issue in a friendly way with something that Gary Zukav said this morning, which is that our choice is to choose love over fear. This kind of statement, while inspirational, doesn't recognize the inherent vulnerability of loving behaviors in a Darwinian world. If we really want love to thrive, we must be smart enough to provide the special conditions required for loving behaviors to outcompete less loving alternative behaviors. And this is true at all scales, from a single pairwise relationship to international relations. These two bodies of knowledge, complex system science and generalized Darwinism, are reflected to a degree at this conference in the presentations and members of the audience, but I know from experience that much more integration is needed, especially in the case of generalized Darwinism, which is so new that otherwise brilliant, well-read, and open-minded people simply have not encountered it yet. So catalyzing awareness and application of these two bodies of knowledge should be given a very high priority. I'll end my section by returning to the topic of scale. While much can be done at small scales, such as creating nurturing social environments for individuals, other problems must be addressed at larger scales, such as global economic systems predicated on short-term profit maximization. This is the system that creates problems such as pathological food systems, overuse of medications, toxins in the environment, the global warming, and so much more. Thus, rethinking economics and governance at the national and international scales must be part of our agenda for improving the health of people, places, and planet. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Your work is really interesting, and I did mean to say earlier that you've written many influential books on connecting evolutionary theory to practical aspects of human life and collective well-being. So I hope someone can find a link to those in the chat and read more about your inspirational work, because I think we really do need to look and understand the social, how we create more pro-social environments, especially if we are to transition to these new ways of being. So it would be great for us to continue that conversation, perhaps in the discussion.
I saw myself fitting into the society and social contract box of Simon
Yes,
Michaud's,
I thought so too. I think you should
just let me just put me in charge of the society and social contract box, please.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So as we begin to think about changing human behavior to solve challenges in the world around us, we also need to look, as we began to this morning, at the inner dimensions of change. And for this, I'm delighted to introduce Rosie Bell, one of the authors of The Systems Within, which is part of the Club of Rome's Earth for All project, which advocates for the psychological, social and spiritual dimensions of sustainability and systems transformation, which has to also be a key part of what we've just been talking about. So welcome, Rosie. Thank you.
So thank you, Susan. So yeah, I'm very honoured to be invited to talk about an essay that was commissioned by the Club of Rome. And it was written with Jamie Bristow, who you'll hear from in a moment, and along with Thomas Björkman, Otto Scharmer, Christine Wamsler, Phoebe Tickell, and Julia Kim. And it's called The System Within, Addressing the Inner Dimensions of Sustainability and System Transformation. So in the briefest terms, this essay highlights some of the important ways that the human inner world, so our mindsets, psychologies, cultures, are producing our systemic crises, and how endemic neglect of these inner factors is getting in the way of solutions, and how the cultivation of our inner capacities could help us transform self and systems. So it's written for an audience that's broadly unaccustomed to integrating inner with outer in systems thinking, to give them some language to use and really quite a basic on-ramp to the field. So I realised for the most part that that's not this audience, so I won't walk you through the content, but I'll just give an overview that hopefully can be useful to you in your own work, whether that's advocacy or field building or whatever it is that you do. A little background. So in 1972, the Club of Rome published its now famous Limits to Growth report, with the first ever advanced computer modelling of climate impacts. And as I'm sure you all know, its conclusions are very clear. It said we've done the math, and you just can't have infinite economic growth on a finite planet. And here's what's going to happen if we try. Our systems will overshoot the Earth's capacity to support them, and they will collapse. So 50 years later, the Club of Rome produced another report, Earth for All, again with state-of-the-art computer modelling, that said, well, we carried on extracting and consuming and growing, and we are now overshooting our planetary boundaries. And we need a giant leap now in system change to prevent collapse and to get to a sustainable and just global society. And here are the policy levers that we now need to pull very urgently in order to get there. And so they talk about 5 extraordinary turnarounds, and those are in food systems and energy systems, as well as transforming poverty, inequality, and empowerment of women. So Earth for All is a very high-level overview of policy priorities, and authors like us were then invited to contribute sort of deeper analysis in our own areas. But it's very striking that the original report doesn't deal with the inner factors at all. And this is emblematic, really, of a wider lack of consideration in the mainstream field of system change of these psychological, the cultural, and the inner factors that create and maintain our crises. And this problem goes all the way to the cultural roots of how globalized modern society conceives reality. So in materially focused cultures, we treat the inner world as if it isn't part of the real world. And when it comes to climate, we conduct our studies and hold our summits, and we formulate our problems and develop our policy solutions. And we do all of this without considering really the mindsets and values and the blind spots that got us here in the first place. And then we keep failing to implement the solutions that we've agreed on within our our institutions, because again, in mainstream institutional thinking, we haven't considered the psychological and cultural barriers to collective action, or the inner capacities that could unlock our collaboration and our sense making and patience and love, like we talked about earlier, and all the skills that we need to get there. Now, I should say here that we don't mean to imply that the inner dimension of sustainability is something new that we've just stumbled across. Of course, it's always present. And the problem is that most of the time in those sort of mainstream areas that are responsible for getting things done, we're not looking at it. And most of the work in this area is heavily indebted to Indigenous and traditional knowledge that's grounded in a more integrated understanding of interdependencies that include the inner world. But this essay we felt was an important chance to introduce inner-led thinking to an audience that's trapped in some ways in externally focused system solutions. So in a very complex territory, we've offered hopefully an accessible introduction that gives system thinkers and policymakers some evidence-based language for this area. So we look at inner factors in two broad categories. So first, we look at what we've called systems of meaning and their role in shaping structures of society and behavior. So these are the deep cultural narratives that sort of shape our experience and guide our actions. So from beliefs and values to cultural paradigms and mindsets, structures of identity and religion, and so on. And this kind of thinking was very much present in the Club of Rome's earlier work. So Donella Meadows, who introduced the idea of leverage points in systems, described shifting mindsets as the deepest leverage point for system change. And then in contrast to these maybe more abstract systems of meaning, we introduce also what we've called states, traits and capacities. So states of mind and body and more enduring psychological traits and tendencies that drive individual and collective behavior. And related to those, some of the transformative capacities of heart and mind that we can cultivate to support resilience and collective action, and also potentially help shift those more foundational attitudes over time. And finally, the paper introduces some existing and emerging inner-outer approaches to system change. So from mindset shift interventions like Theory U and imagination, activism, to even Ubuntu ethics and contemplative frameworks, to well-being economics and the inner development goals framework. So yeah, just returning to the language of Earth for All, the paper sort of concludes with a call to action, hoping that system change approaches will adopt a sixth extraordinary turnaround, and that's a turn to include the inner in system thinking and discourse and strategies, because without integrating the inner, we will simply never be addressing the whole story or tackling the root of dysfunction in our systems. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rosie. That was truly wonderful. And this really resonates so well with many of the guiding principles at Nova and with our work promoting the inner dimensions of change with Planetary Health Alliance and the Constellation Project. And that really recognises the importance of spirituality for planetary health. So I think it would be wonderful for us all to explore some more collaborations in that space. So next, I'm delighted to welcome back Jamie Bristow. And I'm sure many of you will remember Jamie from past conferences when he shared his previous work on the all-party parliamentary mindfulness groups. And he is also a key influence in the Inner Development Goals movement. And today he's going to talk about how we navigate collapsing systems and facilitate transformation. So it's wonderful to see you again, Jamie. Welcome back.
It's really lovely to be here, and we had a fantastic sort of introduction there at the beginning, taking a little look at how difficult it's going to be to make the transition that we need to make, and in so many ways, the work that's being done isn't being done fast enough, deep enough, and in a radical enough way for us to avoid the degradation of our current systems in an inelegant way, to say the least, and the movement towards these sort of circular systems that was illustrated there the path there is likely to be rocky, and there will be a way in which the calls from scientists that we are, 5 minutes to midnight, and we need to make deep changes now, otherwise there will be sort of climate collapse or degradation, haven't been heeded, and so we now need to kind of accept, I think, a new reality, particularly this year with another disappointing COP, the election of Trump, and right-wing surge across Europe, the hottest year on record, etc. That we are now looking at a unavoidable climate disruption, which will lead to, in the short term at least, a very different context. And so what I'm going to do now is just share with you a model which we've published as an opinion piece in the climate news website DSMOG. Really, an updated title for this might be The Evolution of Hope, or sort of 6 reasons why we must escape a kind of binary of optimism and despair and evolve what we hope for. Many of the things that Susan's inspiring introduction are possible, but perhaps on the other side of this kind of rocky road through disruption. So the first thing I think we need to accept is it's no longer 5 minutes to midnight. Scientists in large numbers, 95% of scientists now saying that safe climate change, or 1.5 degrees, is now in the rear view mirror, and that this will in some ways degrade our systems, and some systems will likely fail. If you speak to people in agriculture or the insurance industry, we have big phase shifts coming because our current human systems are predicated on a stable and largely conflict-free environment. The next thing is that these risks can cascade. So failure in one area, say financial systems, or conflict in important bottleneck places in the world, failure in our satellite systems, or will cascade into other areas, triggering what we might term partial systems collapse. But the next thing to kind of be cognizant of is that this collapse doesn't equal the end of the world. And because we have this binary that's offered to us, either we need to have stubborn optimism that it's still 5 minutes to midnight and we still are going to be able to turn it around just in time, because if we don't, the consequences are too difficult to accept. And then our mind kind of, the other option is like that's held over us, is that this will be the end of things, and there's no middle path. So the fifth is that there are actually many paths, many messy middle paths between what the techno-optimists might suggest is possible and what those are labeled sort of doomers say. So we need to sort of stay open, I think, to both of these positions, or find a more nuanced middle path through them, evolving what we hope for. And what we can hope, I think, is that the new paradigms that many of us working on the peripheries here, and are represented amongst the panelists today, are still on the peripheries, partly because people's appetite for change isn't deep enough. And although we wouldn't wish it upon ourselves, and many scary things, and the potential for authoritarian capture and continued decline, etc., is a very real threat, deep crisis also can lead to deep transformation. And in the words of a Zen teaching story, when asked, when do people change, their master says, when they have to. And so we're left looking at these different pathways through of reducing system order and complexity. We have this first field of action, which is super important still. Every fraction of a degree of climate and warming matters. But those different pathways will lead to a second phase where resilience and preservation become absolutely key, even when we're looking at collapse scenarios, because it's possible that those dips through that period could lead to recovery, and a third phase of action where repair, renewal, and regeneration are more possible. So I can't really go into this detail now because I've already gone over my time, I think. But we have fleshed this out in an opinion piece called Between Optimism and Despair, the Messy Middle Paths through Climate Breakdown. And I've spent the last 6 months researching the implications, particularly of this the second field of action, work that we can do now in order to change our trajectory. And one thing that's very clear, as we mentioned already, that investment in the social fabric and psychosocial resilience is going to be absolutely key, both for climate action now, but particularly for this potentially civilizational bottleneck that may well be ahead of us. Okay, thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I think these perspectives, grounded in realism and grounded optimism, are essential, and the inner skills for change are so vital for our society to heal and evolve. And the more people that we can move into this awareness, the closer we can get to that collective shift in consciousness that we need for the real world practical changes along the lines of what Simon was proposing. So thank you. Now we are around the midpoint, and this is a wonderful opportunity. I think we've got some time now. If we would like to pause for some comments or question for any of our panelists so far, this is a chance for anyone present to share thoughts, inspirations, questions. Please be brief though. I would certainly be very interested in Simon's response to some of what has been said by the following speakers. Particularly, Simon, you're definitely going into parliamentary discussions, trying to get these messages across. It's very, very interesting to know how these thoughts are being perceived, what sense of optimism you get from that.
Ultimately, I am optimistic for the future, but not for the reasons that most people think. So first of all, yes, I am talking to lots of people in positions of authority, and the reaction has been consistent. First, there's shock. Then they can't refute what I'm presenting to them, even when they're given time to do so, because I often will present 2 and 3 times to the same crowd over time. But the third reaction is they're asking me what they should do. Now that it's a little demoralizing at first, but like I'm just a guy with a cheap computer and an internet connection, and they've got the resources of an entire government department behind them, and they're asking me what they should do. You know, come on, snap out of it. Anyway, what I've found is when you have an honest discussion, 2 things come out. First, most organizations I talk to across the board are under significant pressure not to say anything negative. Anything that might suggest that jobs will be lost, or we might have an economic recession or something. Don't say anything like that, right? And that is like it's almost like a self-regulating taboo, like social pressure. The second thing that comes out to me that is very apparent is politicians. Every single politician I presented to Australian Parliament, and all the ministers I met, you know, and all their aides. I met the leader of the opposition, and he was just interested in finding dirt on his opponent. He didn't give a shit about any of the problems. But what was apparent was these politicians are all doing the best they can. It's not that they're stupid. It's the system has such a momentum to it that if they put and it's been optimized for the way things are, to the point where if they initiate change in any large scale at all, like the system around them would replace them very quickly, right? So it's power is largely illusionary in this environment. The system itself consumes everything in its path. So when I'm presenting to these politicians, and this happens a lot, at the back of my mind is everyone in front of me will be replaced. They are not mentally fit to lead us into the next era. There'll be 2 challenges of leadership. The first challenge will come in, say your ideas aren't working, we will take over, we're more competent. That round will have the same thinking. When that fails, the second round of leadership challenge will be new thinking. And that will come from someone junior in the room. Who I'm really talking to is some intern or some aide is sitting up the back taking notes. Because when the time comes, they will be in the hot seat when everyone else has been taken down. Right, so that's who I'm really sort of talking to. they are starting to get the idea, like in a private context, they are starting to understand and work these problems. I can now talk about things like peak oil, hyperinflation, currency reset, things like the breakdown of global free trade, and in a private context. Publicly, it's the same message that keeps sort of going out, and that I keep being invited back into these halls of power does tell me that they are thinking about this and they realize that they are responsible for doing something on their watch. Like a lot of promises were made that by 2030 that we will have all this done, and that was made only a couple of years ago. They've done nothing. Like in practical terms, transitioning off fossil fuels and meeting the climate change issues and the social problems that we have, it's been lip service only. Right now, we are one political cycle away from the great unwashed realizing this, and when they do, they will realize that both or all political parties are just as guilty, and it's the system that sits behind them is the problem. Right. So we are in the process. So the biggest problem that we face, though, and I'm hearing a lot of speakers on this panel tonight, is society's ability to trust itself is at an all-time low. In the last couple of years in particular, the political circus has weaponized a lot of beliefs in ways that they should not have done so. And both sides have done this in the American election cycle that's just gone past, and the damage to society is extraordinary. We are now in a position where every single major institution in the United States system is now seen as corrupt and irrelevant. And society is in the process of calling them out on their corruption. Both sides of the aisle are going to get nailed. All institutions are going to take a hit. And this is actually happening where our energy systems are starting to roll over. We are in the process of evolving into something else socially right now. What I've seen over the last couple of years in particular is how people discuss different ideas has been completely weaponized into a complete lack of kindness. People are downright nasty to each other across the board in all things, to the point where one whole section of society is about to reject another part of society on things that had nothing to do with what they truly believed in the first place. So what I think has to happen is a revolution in kindness, where we actually get to the point where the person next to you is actually your solution, not your enemy. Right. So what I'm actually trying to do in my Promethean Nexus project is develop the starting seed of a new social contract. And that new social contract will have two signatures. One, it'll be based around the idea of the family. And two, it'll be based around the idea of sacred masculine meets sacred feminine. So that, and that does not fit with the existing mindset at all. So my plan, cunning as it is to leave them all behind, demonstrate what can be done, and come back with a demonstration. And then people can say, well, okay, this worked. You can stay where you are, or you can try this new idea. And that's my plan. Thank you, Simon. And I think when you actually just go and do it, it shows people. That's the best way of showing a new way. And your words about kindness and how fear has been weaponized really resonate. Gary, I don't know if you want to, Gary Zukov, I don't know if you want to add any of your thoughts here. If not, that's fine, but very welcome if you would like to.
Thank you, Susan. This has been so stimulating to me. I've listened intently to all of the speakers. What I suggested and what I suggest is not a theory or a concept or a hypothesis. It's not ever going to appear in a journal with a model, because I'm looking at inner. I love some of the things that you just said about sacred masculine, sacred feminine. What I'm suggesting is that in my experience, there exists within the old consciousness an uncrossable, an uncrossable, unclimbable barrier between in here and out there. And from that perspective, it's absurd to say that inner transformation can affect the outer world. But that barrier is not a part of the new consciousness. The inner world and the outer world are not different. These two are not two, they are one. And from that perspective, it's evident that there is no way to change the world except to change yourself. And you talk, I'm not talking about you or you or you, I'm talking about the generalized you. Here is a major cultural shift, a major psychological shift, a major emotional shift that is worth considering. We have become accustomed to thinking in terms of parts and the relationships between them. There are no such things as parts, and there never have been. There is one, and all is that. It is not a matter of convincing someone who has external power, which means the ability to manipulate and control. A secretary, a cabinet secretary, a department minister, a president, a prime minister. It depends not upon convincing them or changing them. It all depends upon changing you. And this is the part of the new consciousness that is becoming apparent. The intellect cannot go very far, and intelligence has nothing to do with spiritual development. The intellect was designed to work with the five senses and identify combinations of five sensory data that will assist the personality in pursuing external power. The only way to change the world is, let me put it this way, the things that I can tell you, the intellect, and I will tell you if you ask, the intellect cannot grasp, has no use for, cannot understand, and will never experience. The time has come for the cessation of understanding and to focus instead on the giving and sharing of joy. Joy expresses the new consciousness. Joy and love are the same. Meaning and joy are the same. And this is where we are going. And this is not a plea for you to go there. It's not pleading for anything. It is a matter of looking at yourself and letting your life guide you, because it's always guiding you in the direction of love. It will always take you to the need to make a decision. Your responsibility, or may I say first person, my responsibility is not to control my life. It's filled with wisdom. My responsibility is to choose love. And that is a challenge, because frightened parts of my personality are magnetically attractive, rigid, and righteous. But there is no alternative. But I'm suggesting this from the limited perspective of of what I'm able to experience as this incarnation of Gary Zukov. And it's quite small, but it's wonderfully pleasing to me. And this is what I share with you. This is the future toward which we are all moving. This is the great shift in human consciousness. Right now, the headline is from five sensory to multisensory. But beyond that lies another phase of human evolution, the universal human. And beyond that lies awareness without a single focal point, as a way to say that. The universal human is the last step in the evolution of human, and we are all moving in that direction. And there's no right or wrong way to what you do. If you choose to act with fear, it will create destructive and unconscious consequences. But there will always be learning in them. If you choose to act with love, you will create the opposite. But you will not be rewarded for doing one and punished for doing the other. There is in all cases learning, and that is the Earth School. And I hope this is helpful.
Thank you so much, Gary. I think it's kind of peering into our future potential, which really also exists now. So thank you for invoking the joy and the love that really is now always, because as the more we live in that, the more all these other things will move into being. David, we've probably got time for one quick comment before we need to move on to our next speaker.
Thanks very much, Gary, and also Simon. I just want to respond to something Simon's in particular. I've just been reviewing this new book by Julie Paness, which is called Our Last Innocent Moment. I was very struck in the introduction that she says that we've set ourselves adrift from life framed by the core Western liberal values: liberty, equality, autonomy, most fundamentally. And we find ourselves broken and unrecognizable without them. And this is what I really wanted to emphasize here. And most treacherously, we seem to be tinkering with the fundamental principles of civility. And this really made me think about civility. And she says these are toleration, patience, respect, and kindness. So the recovery of civility along the lines that you've both been talking about at a different level seems critical. And I think it's to be civil to somebody is to be kind, considerate, patient, and so on. So I just like open up a conversation on the renewal of civility. Thank you.
That's wonderful, and we will definitely revisit that because that is really being our best selves and doing so with the greatest love and respect that brings us to a greater sense of unity, I think. So we will move forward now with more of our wonderful panel. In our earlier session, we did explore new paradigms in health and healthcare, and our next speaker will take this to a deeper level. Paul Dieppe is a Nova Scholar and Emeritus Professor of Wellbeing at the University of Exeter Medical School, and he will encourage us to think about the future of health in a much more holistic way that includes love and healing. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Susan. It's an honor to be here. I've really enjoyed this meeting, and my presentation really, I think, in a sense, says what Gary was just saying, but in a slightly different way. I guess we all come from our silos. My silo has been medicine, and I make no apology for that. But we've perhaps come to the same conclusion that basically it's all about love. So this is the title that Susan gave me. I've sort of changed it a little bit. I'm actually going to talk briefly about placebo, telecebo, and healing, because that's how I got to where I've got to. So placebos first, you know about the placebo effect, which is people getting better without any intervention, been known about for a long time. And today it's mostly talked about in the context of drug trials, where you test a drug with an identical dummy treatment, which has got nothing in it. And the dummy treatment usually has a big positive effect, and that really annoys the drug companies and their trialists. They regard it as a real nuisance and have tried to diss it over the years and suggest it's not real, but it is. And in fact, the placebo often contributes most of the improvement that we see when we give any intervention. This is a graphical representation of some work that we did on pain relief in osteoarthritis. The effect of active agents is shown in the red, of placebo interventions in blue, and no treatment in the black. And you can see that the placebos are contributing most of the change. But of course, our technology and our pharmaceutical industry is just messing about with the relatively small bit that's the bit between the red and the blue, and we ignore the blue bit completely and don't make use of it, which is a bit of a nonsense. People have done a lot of research on how placebos work, how they're activated. Some psychological theories such as expectation or conditioning are worked on, and some neurological theories based on things like functional MRI showing the neural pathways that light up. But that is how they might work. It's not why. And I think in this research, it's a classic example that happens a lot in biomedical research, that we confuse how with why. We think we've got an understanding because we know a bit about how things work, but actually we don't know very much at all about why placebos work. Now, in 2016, the great Larry Dossey introduced the term telesebo to take this to new levels, to describe the effects of placebo at a distance. In his article, Beyond Placebo to an Expanded Concept of Healing. And what he focused on was the fact that, whoops, I've skipped a slide, that the evidence that placebo effects could occur at a distance, and that plants and seeds can respond to placebos as well as animals. And the evidence for this sort of effect at a distance has got much stronger since its publication. And I think the really exciting bit that's happened over recent years is the experiments in which you have multiple people trying to change things at a distance and actually achieving small but appreciable changes in social behavior in the area they focus on. So actually, if we all tried to make the world a better place, it probably would be a better place. And that's, I think, a very exciting extension of the concept of placebo towards healing. Now, healing, though, is a bit different in the sense it might regard it as transformational change through connecting with others, but basically it's not a thing. It's an experience. It's a qualia, if you like, rather than a thing. But because we are focused on thinking in terms of materialism and in terms of breaking things into their parts, we want to define it, we want to pin it down, and we can't because it's something that you just experience and it's very variable. But it does work at a distance as well as within people, and it does work on plants and seeds in culture and all sorts of other bizarre things. And none of this makes any sense at all within our concepts of materialism that dominate the way that us biomedical people think. So what's going on? Well, obviously, I don't know what's going on, but my work on healing with healers and also with near-death experiences that I mentioned in this meeting last year make me think that it is all about connections, and the qualia, another form of qualia, love, which of course is what Gary was talking about. And it seems to me very likely that love is the primary essence of the universe, allowing connectivity, and that if we all nurtured our love for the planet and for each other, things might improve. Thank you.
That's perfect, Paul. Absolutely wonderful. And I think our approach to health and healing is just so limited, isn't it, by our Newtonian way of seeing our bodies. And as we begin to see ourselves through a more quantum lens, it gets a lot more exciting. So, you know, that's where this love and energy come in. Something that, as you say, orthodox medicine doesn't make allowances for, but we're seeing that our mitochondria generate light and transduce energies in ways that we don't understand yet. And I'm sure this is going to be a new frontier that will lead us in new directions. And that same quantum shift applies to all sectors of societies, which brings us to how we can reimagine the transactional energies of our economic systems, the lifeblood of our societies, which is unfortunately no longer serving our best interests. And to discuss that, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce John Fullerton, a self-described unconventional economist who left a highly successful 20-year career on Wall Street to become the architect of regenerative economics and regenerative finance. And this work is really inspirational, and it's essential to support transitions to a sustainable, flourishing future. So we're so excited to have you with us, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. And boy, what a wonderful set of conversations. I almost feel like I want to use up my 5 minutes just responding to the others, but this does follow nicely the materialist Newtonian limitations and flaws are alive and well in the economics discipline. In fact, economics was built on Newtonian physics and never corrected, believe it or not. But I'm going to start with a simple proposal, and that is a proposal that we have faith in life and trust in life. That is the essence of really the regenerative paradigm. And as Susan said, the economy is now very much the water we swim in. It's way too important to be left to the economists. Worse, our decision-making, not just in economic matters, but in all of our governance decisions, are really trapped in what I call the finance algorithm, which essentially optimizes the value of money over all other values by design. We call it an internal rate of return for a reason. It's internal to the owners of capital. And I received a LinkedIn post this morning titled "It's Not Working," with a article and highlights about how the whole business-led, voluntary targets-led sustainability movement is not working. And in fact, it's moving backwards. Certainly the recent election in the United States and the divisiveness we have is not helping, but it wouldn't be working even without that. And so it reminded me of I was given a 5-minute chance to do an intervention at a meeting at the Paris COP among a group of experts. And I tried to start explaining regenerative economics, and I could tell by minute 3, no one knew what I was talking about. And so I said, I'm working on something that people will only become interested in when they realize what they're working on is not working. And so with that, I'll share very briefly what I'm working on. Let me start with Fritjof Capra's recent description of 4 systemic principles of life. He described that life is organized in networks, so that's the structure. He described regeneration as the process that explains how life works. And then he went on to say that life is inherently creative and inherently intelligent. And yet we organize our societies and our businesses hierarchically in conflict with how life works. We use mechanistic processes to design and run the economy. It's very much run in a Newtonian machine clockwork universe way, and we optimize essentially money. And we value reductionist logic over creativity and consciousness, despite the fact that creativity is, I would say, the essence of life. Although I wouldn't argue that love is the essence of life. Maybe there's some interconnection there. And of course, we think we know better than the intelligence of life, and we actually kill our curiosity by the time our students get out of high school. So this transformation to a regenerative process is really, it has been for me, a shift in consciousness. And I was sort of blown away when I was reading a book on Western mysticism, that the early alchemists used the word regeneration. They said regeneration was their watchword. So this shift from a mechanistic economic system to a regenerative economic system is very much about a shift in consciousness, a transformation that is far beyond what most people in the world of economics and business are even contemplating. And my proposal for regenerative economics is based on 3 simple premises. The first is that the economy, made up of it's a human economy, is a living system embedded in a much larger living system. The second premise is there are patterns and principles that we understand now that describe how life actually works. And the third premise is that if the human economy is to be regenerative, it too will need to follow these same patterns and principles. And I don't have time to go into what those principles are. I've sketched out 8 of them in my work. But the key idea here is that if we practice faith in how life works and prioritize these principles and are serious about them and not sort of cherry pick them when they're convenient, no matter the cost, what follows out of that is regenerative potential. Which is what allows life to continue and be the miracle that it is. And this is the same story playing out in health, and I believe would play out in education. If we let go of our goals and our metrics a little bit and focus on creating conditions for health, we will join this miracle process we call life, which, by the way, Simon's brilliant industrial permaculture analogy, that is the regenerative economy right there. Very different than the mechanistic circular economy conversations we've been having for the last 25 years that, by the way, aren't working. And as well as his sacred masculine and feminine, those align with the principle of imbalance that I talk about. And of course, all of this is, to me, remarkable that nothing that I'm saying is new. This is simply repeating many of our ancient wisdom traditions and the core teachings in particular of our indigenous knowledge. So we've gone full circle in our modern age arrogance and come back to having to rediscover what we've already known and put it into practice in a profoundly different way. So again, let us have faith in life.
Thank you so much, John. And so much of this is common sense to people on the street, so to speak, but the biggest challenge is overcoming the inertia of the systems that we've engineered. But the good news is that there is growing public awareness and dissatisfaction with these broken systems, and that's leading to mounting pressure to change them. And we're living in an era of social media and podcasters where people have access to information and more people have a voice. And in that environment, our next speaker, Barry Liberman, provides a really important voice for change. Barry is a pioneer in impact investing, and she hosts the Wisdom and Action podcast, which I personally enjoy and recommend. She really explores meaningful interventions for a hopeful future with many inspiring leaders from different fields. So welcome, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. Good morning. What an amazing morning it's been. I had to get up at 5:15 in the morning to be here with you all. And now that I'm speaking, it is exactly the moment that my 3 children are getting ready for school. So if we hear shouting, fighting, the throwing of toast, that's what is happening in this house. There are so many things that I could talk to in this conversation. I've worked as an impact investor for 20 years. I inherited a large legacy. The bulk of my legacy actually came from fossil fuels. So what's cool about that is I've spent my entire adult life transforming that capital into regenerative capital. John Fullerton's an old friend and mentor and wonderful person. Many of us have been working together to try and reimagine the purpose of capital, financial capital in particular, but of course all our forms of capital, intellectual, social, love capital, what we do with it. So I thought I might put an offering into this. I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner. I've always been 100% all in. So my husband and I have been 100% impact investors from the day that we had agency and access over our capital. And we've been playing with originally, before impact investing was a term, there was triple bottom line investing, people, planet, profit. Like, we've been trying to reimagine the story of money. And the long story of it is that the transformation of the economy is going to take an enormous transformation of consciousness and the story of humanity and all the metaphors that we work within. So at Harvard, we're taught about an endless growth curve without learning about the depletion curve upon which it depends. And we now work a lot with Kate Raworth's model of donut economics, which is what everyone in this conversation has been talking about, the new metaphor of an economy where the proposition is, can we live within the bounds of the ecology and towards human flourishing? There's this sweet spot there for humanity, and can we do it? And I think this is what this forum is about, and these conversations and academics and intellectuals are trying to solve for. So the conversation about energy is incredibly important. I've spoken with Nate Hagans about, can we do that? Can we live in that sweet spot? As we can see, it's an enormous challenge when we face the reality of it. So in the deeper our work went, the more we realized we had to formalize all of the things we were doing at Small Giants that was just happening inside our family office. And that formalized into the Small Giants Academy, which is our education, media, and accelerator institute, in service of really hospicing the old world to midwife the new, in service of this bridging transition piece that everyone's been talking about. And I think partly I'm just like, check out the Small Giants Academy if you're interested. It's a leadership institute to really help leaders of today become fit for purpose for the 21st century. Like, what does it look like to actually be able to be in the halls of Parliament, as we've heard this morning, listen to the information, understand the science, and adapt the systems for a pro-social future. And one of the things that we do that I think would be of interest in this space, other than my podcast, the Wisdom in Action podcast, where I speak to luminaries from around the world about how we pivot to new systems dynamics, we run an alternative MBA. It's called the MBE. It's a Mastery of Business and Empathy. And in that work, we work with people on the inner development required to be leaders in the outside world. So you get everything you need for a traditional MBA that's kind of the hook. But then when people come in, they see that it's this very profound inner transformation and inner work that's required. But it's also about the cohort. So I think I'm talking about investing in social infrastructure. And we need to invest in the social infrastructure so that people can safely integrate all the ideas that are being put on the table here, because loneliness is the epidemic of our time, really, human disconnection. And how do we foster connection in what we're now thinking of as bioregional containers? So localization as a kind of lens for how we invest and what we invest in. And I loved that comment from Jamie before on your slideshow, that there will be no bunker for what we are going to be facing. I think that's absolutely true. All the conversations about how individuals can secure their families against what's coming. What if we got a city of 5 million people that we live in, which is where I live, the city of Melbourne? What if we got those cities into a state of resilience, inner and outer resilience, cultural story of who we are and how we're going to move into the future together? So I'm really focused on the cultural story. The work that we're doing there actually around the donut from our accelerator is called Regen Melbourne. Susan, I don't know if you know about the work at Regen Melbourne, but Regen Melbourne, yeah, great. Regen Melbourne is our literal, we had this accelerator that came from a chat like this. We had Kate Rayworth come and talk to our community and our alumni, which is in the thousands now. And from the chat, people were like, well, let's turn Melbourne into the donut, Sydney into the donut, Brisbane into the donut. And that sparked a huge movement. And we've now, at Regen Melbourne, designed the Melbourne Donut along with hundreds of other organisations. And we've come up with 8 earth shots for the city of Melbourne and how we're going to achieve that together. And this kind of leadership comes from people who are able to level up from their inner world development to then saying, well, if I'm working in a renewables organisation, or actually it's more interesting than that. We've got people from the Air Force who do our program, who sit in cohorts with the leadership at Greenpeace. And they are at a table together discussing how we get Australia into a place of resilience, and also what is the ecological foundation upon which we depend. And then, so there's a lot to talk about here, but essentially what I'm interested in is fostering islands of sanity with corridors of aliveness. And I see our planet as a living organism. All of us are connected. And I know Australia seems very far away. It is far away, but we're on the same planet with all of you. And what happens in America happens here, not just in terms of politics, but in terms of the ecology upon which we all depend. And I just live in service to my children's future and your children's future. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Barry. I mean, this is wonderful, and your podcast and your wider work is so important. And an inspiration to many. And just referring everybody to the links to Barry's podcast. I think Samuel's been putting that in the chat, and to Small Giants. And that's also on the profile at our events page. So we really do appreciate that, Barry. So whatever it may look like, the next phase of human civilization is really calling for a deeper sense of universal connection, with, as we've been hearing repeatedly, and unity that allows for new ways of being, and what some are describing as a transition to a more unitive consciousness. And our next speaker, Jude Currivan, has been a pioneer in this deeper level of transformational change. Jude studied quantum physics and cosmology at Oxford, and she's become a well-known author and futurist. She's also a friend of our community, and we're so delighted to welcome you back, Jude. It's so good to see you again. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. And it's wonderful to see some old friends on this call and some new friends too. Gary, it's wonderful to see you. And John and others. I've been so inspired by this. And what I'd like to start with is going back to something that was said about Daniela Meadows, who said that in terms of interventions for change, the greatest of these, the most effective of these, is a shift in worldview. And our worldviews are the lenses, they're the eyes through which we see the world, and therefore the choices we make. And a number of speakers have talked about a shift in consciousness and a remembering that essentially we're inseparable, while we've had a paradigmic worldview of materialism and separation hitherto. I suppose for my 5 minutes, what I'd like to share is how that is now being turned completely on its head. Because from Paul working with healing, and John in economics, everyone on this call is seeking to serve deep and rapid transformation. But for me, actually transforming our worldview and turning that old paradigm of materialism and separation on its head is vital. And we're able to do that, it seems to me now, because we have the evidence. We literally have not had the evidence in any level of compelling, guidance or support or validation for us to do this until very recently. But now that's happening at all scales of existence and across many different fields of research, from cosmology, physics, chemistry, meteorology, systems, evolutionary biology, and crucially, at the scale of our everyday lives. Human collective patterns of behavior are actually reflecting the same patterns that we see in ecosystems. So the internet actually embodies the hubs, the networks, the connectivity that an ecosystems do. So because of this, we're literally able to converge with indigenous wisdom traditions and universal wisdom teachings into a unitive worldview. And I'll put some links in the chat, and kindly Adam's put my books in the chat, because what my books do is really set out the evidence for this at all these scales and across all these different fields of research. But what it's showing is it's providing, therefore, an underpinning and framing for transformational change, because it is the science of love. It is showing that our universe meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves from simplicity to complexity, individuated self-awareness as a unitive entity. So the sort of the effects that Paul was speaking to don't have a place for validation in that old paradigm. They have a natural place in this new paradigm of oneness and inseparability and interdependence. So that, I think, is vital, because now we have this convergence, and it is a convergence of love, of potential evolutionary transformation. And it does, with it, enable us to express a new narrative, a unitive narrative. And someone said earlier about the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine. Yes, the inner being, the outer doing. Yes, spiritual, cultural transformation, hearts, minds, acting hands, somebody said very early in the chat, and souls, all are naturally held, nurtured, embraced in this emergent cosmology, this emergent unitive understanding. So this, I feel, really can empower transformational change, because it's revealing to us who we really are. And vitally, it's revealing to us also who we can evolve to become as planetary custodians, as Gaians, as evolutionary, co-evolutionary partners with each other, our planetary home, and our entire universe, because its evolutionary arc continues. And our opportunity, it seems to me, and to many of the inspirational folks who I've heard speak so far, that it can invite us into new ways of looking at the world. John Fullerton and I have been working on perhaps reframing the meta-crisis, as it's sometimes called, into a metamorphosis. Because in a metamorphosis, the old caterpillar dissolves into the nutrient soup that then can evolve into the butterfly. So we can do that. We can do that with our systems. Somebody mentioned in chat hospicing the old to midwife the new. Yes, breakdown and breakthrough. But perhaps in the creativity and the co-creativity of bringing in new language, new perceptions, new ways of looking, a unitive perspective of oneness, of inseparability, and yet, unity expressed in radical diversity, where each of us is unique, and yet all of us are ultimately one. This is the story that I'm sharing in A Radical Guide to Reality as a short documentary for young people and truth seekers of all ages. So what we've done is we've provided it free to view, to share, to use on YouTube. We've provided it subtitled in 17 languages, from Arabic to Ukrainian. And at Whole Worldview, our way of being, our service, is to serve the understanding, experiencing, embodiment of this unitive awareness. I've put a link to a unitive narrative that brings all of this into a way of approaching transformational change, originally written to support transformational change at the United Nations, but globally. And now as part of what's called a deep and rapid transformation convergence of many hundreds of change makers that are all coming from a unitive perspective, underpinned and framed by a unitive narrative, to serve unitive transformation, evolutionary change. And I just wanted to finish by really adding to the incredible work that's being done on bioregional transformation, economic transformation, financial system transformation in the world, to really perhaps us to invite us to reframe even beyond Kate's incredible work on donut economics, because yes, of course we have to live within planetary carrying capacities and human flourishing, and to meld those two and nurture those two together. But I would also say that our planet is evolving, and its evolutionary potential and our evolutionary potential opens up an incredible potential for adventure, for creativity, and above all, for the embodiment of love. Because if we see that love is the way in which our universe, its interdependence is carried forward in right relationship. One of John's 8 economic principles for regenerative economics is right relationship. Then perhaps most fundamentally, love is about right relationship, reciprocity, mutuality, civility, kindness, and co-creativity. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jude. And I think we do feel like we're in the middle of a metamorphosis and evolving, and it might seem difficult and confusing at the time, but it does seem to be leading to something greater. And the way you zoom out to this big picture helps us put things into perspective. And if more people can approach things this way, we would be able to change the world tomorrow, but that's not our path. We have to learn, and it's a pathway. But the work you're doing with young people, and that is another theme that we need to continue, the young generation, next generation, is where the real hope lies. So thank you so much. And this brings us to our final panelist, David Lorimer, a visionary thinker and pioneer in promoting a holistic understanding of human potential. And David has dedicated his career to bridging the realms of science and spirituality and a deeper integration that speaks to both the mind and the heart. And today he'll share his insights on how this approach can guide us to a more enlightened and sustainable future for humanity. Thank you, David.
Thanks very much, Susan, and hello, everybody. Evening, morning, middle of the night. I don't know where you are. I'm actually going to go off-piste because I've been very moved and stirred in the last 24 hours, and I think I'll be able to explain why. I'm sitting in here in my study in France on a chair designed by my grandfather, Sir Robert Lorimer. Here he is with his dog, and at a bureau designed by him as well. Where did these start? In his imagination. They were dreamt, they were designed, they were then produced by wonderful craftsmen in Edinburgh. And I want to read you a brief part of the eulogy at his service. And in 1929, says, by his labors, he's given our nation many a poem in wood and stone, which will continue to impress on the minds of people the sense of another and greater world which surrounds us, and which will lift the thoughts of generations yet unborn to that house of God, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. The workmen die, the dreamers pass away, but the dreams, the idealism, the vision, and the work remain. The dreams, the idealism, the vision, and the work remain. And that's why we're here together having this meeting, because we are dreaming and enacting something new into being. We live in incredibly dangerous times. I don't need to tell everybody that. And I'm minded of the campaign against nuclear disarmament in the 1950s with Russell and Einstein and later Albert Schweitzer. And what did they say? Remember your humanity and forget the rest. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. And I think that's where we are at the moment. We have to remember this deep humanity that we all share. And in Schweitzer's terms, he talked about spiritual development being the most important, more than social and technological development, and that our task is to become more finely and deeply human, more finely and deeply human. So we all have to ask ourselves, what does that mean in my case? How can I become more finely and deeply human? And what this certainly involves is an intrinsic, non-instrumental understanding of the human being. And here's Albert Schweitzer for you. And I put a link to his Nobel Peace Prize speech in the chat, which I recommend you have a look at. And in this sense, a new book by Sherto Gill couldn't be more important. And this is it here. It's called Lest We Lose Love, Rediscovering the Core of Western Culture. This should be studied and enacted in all cultures, and this should be a core curriculum item in our schools, which also I wanted to mention this is to bring in the feminine, the sacred feminine, divine feminine, in balance, of course, with the sacred and divine masculine. And what she's been working on is what she calls a narrative of love, a narrative of love. David Cadman's been working on this. And I've got one more point to make, and then I'm going to read you a poem. And here is the Bulgarian sage Peter Dunov, Beinsa Duno, whose work I've been following and living for the last nearly 40 years. He has 5 principles on which the new culture will be based, and these are love, wisdom, truth, justice, and goodness. And he says it's not a belief system that will save us or transform the world. It's understanding and embodying these principles, understanding love, wisdom, truth, justice, and goodness. And on the Scottish mace, oddly enough, are the words wisdom, compassion, integrity, and wisdom, justice, compassion, integrity. And I'd love to see all politicians take an oath to uphold those principles. So here's my poem. And I was debating which poem to read, and I could read one more if anybody would like this at the end, but I want to read you this one called The Beating Drum of War. And I use a Russian proverb quoted by Solzhenitsyn in his Nobel Prize 1970 acceptance speech, Nobel Prize for Literature. One word of truth outweighs the whole world. One word of truth outweighs the whole world. The beating drum of war and death grimly grates and grinds our humanity to dust. Echoing ominously down dark corridors of power, where men as hawks securely scheme behind closed doors, making carefully calculated moves on the grand chessboard for their own strategic advantage. Their ceaseless propaganda is drummed out in unison, demonizing the enemy, drilling us with pitiless fear into submission and obedience, trampling us all underfoot. What do they care? Why bother considering the mothers, the children, the massacre of the innocents, the bloody gore of the combatants, the pulverization of communities? Out of sight, out of mind. They profit from destruction. They profit from reconstruction. This is how the world works. This is how the world ends. This is how the heart stops. Where is the throbbing pulse of love, the beating drum of life? Where are the warriors of the spirit? Where is the flashing sword of truth? Where are we, the only guardians of peace? Rising and standing together, gathering and moving together, we can and must prevail together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your beautiful poem and powerful, and for rounding out this session. I think to realise our potential and achieve wiser, kinder, fairer and conscious societies, we really need to integrate these deeper dimensions of our humanity.
How do we make ourselves heard? That's my question.
Yes.
How do we rise up as humanity?
And that is a perfect way to begin our discussion. And we don't have a long time left, but it's important that we share as much as we can in this remaining time. So again, I invite you to put your cameras on, and we invite comments, questions, any thoughts or inspiration on anything that's been raised so far. So thank you all. I would like to pick up on the thread of the next generation that I think was seeded first by Simon, if Simon's still with us. Dave Nelson.
Thanks. This is this has been a fantastic conference. Those that know me know I've been studying complexity systems and networks for the past 2 years, and it just seems like the whole thing just interconnected in the last four hours or so. So it's absolutely fabulous. Jude, I wanted to say, really appreciated what you said. I believe what you believe, in that we really need a foundational change that's subcellular to get the emergent property of the things that we're looking for. And I think that it is the unity question. And I just wanted to point out, like, what she's talking about is happening in real time. There was an award actually just awarded in Europe for a few no-go theorems in physics, which questioned Wigner's friend in The Nature of the Observer. Like this is so deep and happening. So I'm just blown away by all the interconnections that are happening in all these worlds. There's something non-material going on and emerging in us to create this focus of heart, if you want to put it that way, or a focus in the faith of life. And it's inspiring to me. I'm an older dad with younger kids. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 9-month-old. So these things, I'm like, what you're asking, I'm like, how do I impart this to the next generation? So one of the things that we're doing as a family is we're literally trying to live it. So we're trying to become a manifestation of love, of empathy, of soft words and better parenting, and growing my wife and I grow together so that the kids can see how to grow and how to be emotionally regulated and how to love one another. And then you study quantum physics and you say, hey, non-locality has just been awarded as a Nobel Prize. That's why I feel so close to my family and my kids, even when I'm non-local. You know, the feeling we can't put into words on paper is an expression of this thing we're poking, saying the sacred needs to reinvigorate science. So this is just fabulous for me as a dad, is bringing it for like down to the real bare metal. I really appreciate everything that everyone does. And to Denny's work on the Decade of the Child, we're bringing that, whether the government adopts it or not, we're sending that message out that we need to do this.
And it all starts with us, as Gary said. Jude.
Thank you, David. I just to add to that point, when we did A Radical Guide to Reality, it really is for young people and truth seekers of all ages, but we really focused it on sort of 13 to 14-year-olds. And we did some focus groups very early on in the process, and the sort of responses were wonderful. I mean, they were going, before seeing the film, they were saying, I'm not sure I have a meaning. I'm not sure I have a purpose. They came out of actually viewing the film saying, I now know I do. I know I have meaning and purpose. And more importantly, even than that, I know I belong. And for that response, and there was one response by a 3-year-old who, a friend of John and I was talking about it. This friend, who's a conscious business leader, was sitting on the sofa watching the film, and his 3-year-old came running into the room, and he heard the beginning of the film. And Bob said, for the first time since he was born, he slowed down, and he got a blanket. He got onto the sofa next to his grandpa, cuddled up to his grandpa, and watched the film. And then at the end of the film, he said, can I watch it again, Grandpa? And Bob was saying, what? So there's something that is this sort of evolutionary impulse that I feel is flowing through all of us and our human family and our planetary family. And so for us, perhaps it's to attune and align with that evolutionary impulse and serve its potential. So all of us are saying in our own ways, but it is coming, as David said, from settled science now of universal oneness. It's not hypothetical, it's counted now as settled science. So thank you.
Thank you, Jude. And we can argue the 3-year-old is much closer to its memories of the universe. Patrick, welcome. Patrick, please.
Unmute, sorry. Thank you so much. The question is initially directed at Jude, but anyone may choose to respond, and that is, you know, just having come back from a series of pilgrimage to sacred sites, it strikes me that it's about the relationship and connection to all beings, not just the human beings. And so oftentimes we move from a place of a conceptual aspect of relating to all beings rather than an animistic, true deep relationship and connection, and how important that is in terms of being able to connect to the natural world and be in right relationship with all that is. It seems to me that's an essential form of feeling. And McGilchrist talks so much about the matter with things, and as we objectify, we actually separate from that relationship. And I'd love to hear anyone speak to that.
Thank you, Patrick. We're running very short of time, but Wendy has got a hand up, and she may actually want to speak to that.
Susan, I would have to say I've actually dedicated. I've gone to both sessions, so I've had a full day, and oh my goodness, it's like the most wonderful coming together of people working across disparate fields who were all starting to say the same thing. But I really wanted, John said, to have faith in life. I have huge faith in life, and particularly young children and the protection of young children, and to understand that a baby has no sense of separation and is innately connected to other species. And you know that, so it's not just for me talking to and accessing and working with young people later on, but it's absolutely protecting the vital and sacred quality of connection and relationship that young children have, and trying not to interfere with it. So yeah, and that interspecies work, I get very frustrated that very often conversations are very, very focused on human-centric well-being and flourishing, and actually flourishing in particular has to be ecosystemic. So yes, it's been a joy, Susan, to hear everybody, and many that I know here.
We're
So
coming right up on time, and we do have some other things to say, but Janet, I really would love to hear your voice. Briefly, please. Thank you.
Thank you for everything and everyone who is here today. I'm going to just make that short. I put my hand up when you were speaking, Jude, or in response to your speaking, when you were talking about this young person, also the territory I'm working in, who said, I know I belong. And that flipped me back to your earlier talk, Gary, where you spoke about understanding. And then there's a realm beyond that. And that is where we just know, we just purely and plainly and with nothing that has to be said about it, know this or that, or who I am, or what's to happen next, or what this means, what is possible, all those things. And there are different realms that we go to. We live in this one that has us thinking and making arguments about why, and therefore trying to work in the understanding level. But beyond that, when we go into the larger place to figure out, not to figure out, but to experience what's really true here, the back and forth, evaporates that false sense of boundary that we have. There is no boundary between.
Well said. Thank you so much, Janet. And I have no desire to rush anything, but we do have a few things to say. If there's anyone else who really feels called to speak, just a last call. Otherwise, I'll invite Brian. Just wants to say a few brief words of thanks before we will show the theme video, the message from the future, as we end. But I do want to just give Brian a chance to say thank you.
What an amazing meeting. And I just also want to say thank you for the deepest part of my heart to all of you for spending the time, for the work that you're all doing, and for who you are. And it just, such an example of how things can really shift forward. The range of talks that we had and the underlying principles behind them, I think, are exactly what the world needs now. As many of you know, that I'm a big fan of Jonas Salk, and he had I'd often quote him, and one of his quotes is that what we need is an epidemic of health. And I think what we were hearing throughout the day today is some of the ingredients of how we would actually get to an epidemic of health. And then underneath that, all underlying by the shift in consciousness that we've heard from many different people here. And so that real change can occur because we are truly divine, eternal, sovereign beings. And then from that space of allowing and love, I think miracles can happen. And I think then it's, just no limitations, infinite possibilities. So I just applaud you all. Let's keep doing the work. Let's keep doing the work together. If there's any way that the Nova Institute, and I think there are different ways that we can be supportive and just keep building on things together. And let's have a heck of a lot of fun doing it. So thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Susan.
Wonderful epidemic of love, kindness, and fun as well. And we're going to put up the slide, Lachlan, of the Nova Integration Hub. This is just to remind everyone that the conversation does not end here. If you want to add to the conversation, create your own groups and discussions on the Hub, this is a wonderful place to be able to do that. Next, we know that not everyone is able to attend the whole time, and we hope to have the recordings of this session up probably in the next week or so. We've provided a program that we hope underscored the need to look over the horizon, and just by doing that we actually help create the forward momentum that we need for change. We hope that these conversations spark new ideas and new relationships that will also contribute to that process, and this was really designed to emphasize the interconnections and interdependence of literally everything, while at the same time emphasizing the core common threads which bring us all back together to our shared humanity, our relationship, and the need to invest in our inner resources for outward change. Even though, as Gary says, it's the same thing, we feel that these events are so important to nourish all of these things, and we hope to see you at our ongoing campfire events and bonfires. So before we end with our final theme video, I would just like to add my enormous thanks to all of our speakers and all of you for bringing your energy and your enthusiasm, and also thanks to the people behind the scenes at Nova, especially Rick, Aaron, Tolu and Lachlan in the studio in Melbourne, who's working through the night for us. Last but not least, my partner in work and life, Alan Logan, who helped shape this program. So with that, we wish you all much love and light for the holiday season, and we're going to conclude with that 2-minute opening theme video, which some of you may have missed at the first time, that is really a message of gratitude from the children of the future. So thank you all. We're going to play that now.